Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Extension. Determinants of population problems are birth rate, death rate and migration rate of the population. And these are components of the population studies. We know that population is the cause and consequences of development, which means development affected by the population, and the development affects population. When a country feels that the birth is higher or the mortality rate is higher or migration rate is higher, and what is the impact on development of the country based on the available resources? Economic growth and quality of people, etc. is the base of population studies. Then, population scientist has think on the causes of population problems for the country, and problem of the country from the population and consequences of this population. Studies have been evolved. Population studies are the complex ideas of development, linked with interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches of development which affects both population and national resources for the development. After reading this unit, learner will be able to I. Explain the origin of population studies. E. Discuss the role of population thinkers. E. Describe the population events chronological. IV. Narrate the population and development based on the population thinkers. 2.2 Evolution of population studies. Development of any discipline has 4 stages: situation, objective, problem and solution. It means what is the situation of population and its environment? What is the objective of population and development? What are the problems in population? And what are the solutions of these population problems? Search of problems starts from awareness level, and awareness creates interest on subjects and so on. Curiosity and concern about the size and characteristics of the population have had a long history. Gould, 2009, has stated that population studies as a body of knowledge and cohesive theory has also experienced changes in content, context and approach, but over a longer period than development studies. That is why we can say that population and development is running together and both are interlinked or interdependent. Development of the population and development for the population is the root of the population studies. After reviewing of the literature, we can find that first thinker of population and development, especially food security issues, was Malthus. He has got ideas from the French Revolution of 1789 and writings of William Godwin, who argued that unequal distribution of power in society was the root cause of poverty. Malthus argued that the poor were largely responsible for their own poverty, and that population growth would in the long run generate even greater poverty and inequality, as the population would outstrip the resources on which they could survive. That is why someone says that, hey poor, you are poor because you are poor. In the mid-17th century, population studies emerged as discipline in England, followed by France, Germany and other European countries. USA contributed substantially towards the development of this discipline. 2.3 Thinkers of population studies. According to available population or demographic literature, first population studies thinker was Malthus, but scientific study of population and empirical study of population had started prior to Malthus by John Grant, an English haberdasher. John Grant is called founding father of research on population studies or father of demography. There are many thinkers of population and development over a period of time, such as Mahatma Gandhi, Margaret Sanger, Annie Besant, etc. In modern India, Radha Kamal Mukherjee is the big name in population studies. Grant has published a pamphlet on natural and political observations made upon the Bills of Mortality in London, 1662, which is the landmark in the history of population studies. He has emphasized on quantitative analysis of mortality and only incidentally that of fertility and migration. The Bills of Mortality from which Grant obtained the data for his analysis were weekly current reports on burials and christenings in a population of nearly 500,000 persons in London and its environs. These reports were compiled and maintained regularly from 1603 onwards by parish clerks. Grant assembled the data contained in these reports for the period 1604 to 1661 and prepared a report, which is today regarded as the first systematic and objective study of population. It is said that in the maze of events recorded in the Bills of Mortality, he sought and found order. Bhende and Kanitkar. 2010, 2.3. 1 Jan Grant's view on population studies. Grant's study is monumental in several respects. He considered many aspects in the field of population studies, which are even today regarded as important. He critically examined the data on mortality and fertility and pointed out their weaknesses, biases and inadequacies. He is, therefore, deemed to be a pioneer, for he started an important tradition of evaluating any population data for various biases and lacunae and of devising adjustments in them to minimize the weaknesses and biases before using such data for research purposes. He made several observations based on his basic data, which he presented in his work in great detail. Some of his inferences are mentioned here, so that the reader can get some idea about his ingenious and painstaking investigations. He discovered the biological phenomena of the excess of male births over female births and measured sex ratios at birth in London and in the surrounding rural community. He also observed that the number of deaths exceeded that of births in London, whereas in the rural areas it was the other way round. He estimated the ratio of deaths to births in London as nearly 12 to 11 in contrast to that of 52 to 63 in the countryside. He estimated the size and growth of the population of London in absolute numbers. Since deaths outnumbered births in London for over half a century, he attributed the increase in the population of London to migration and estimated the volume of migration. By using the ratio of births to marriages, he tried to measure fertility. At several points, he tried to give explanations for the regularities which he observed in his data. At all other times, however, he avoided speculations which were not supported by empirical data. The discipline of population studies is indeed indebted to John Grant for laying the foundation of a new science. At the same time, a grateful tribute must be paid to those unknown parish clerks who initiated, compiled and maintained the bills of mortality. Some of Grant's English contemporaries and successors share with him the credit of founding population studies. Sir William Petty, 1623 to 1687, an English scholar and Grant's contemporary, was also his friend and collaborator. He inspired and encouraged Grant in his undertaking. Petty's own political arithmetic has considerably influenced the future development of population studies. He also contributed a great deal to the enhancement of the social prestige of this new discipline. Through the Royal Society, it was Petty who called this newly founded discipline political arithmetic and named himself as its godfather. Grant and Petty together even prepared a life table. Another important contribution to the advancement of population studies was made in London about 30 years after the publication of Grant's observations by Edmund Halley, 1665 to 1742, an English astronomer whose surname has been immortalized by the comet named after him. In 1693, Halley constructed the first empirical life table based on the data of births and deaths. It was he who coined the term expectation of life. Gregory King, 1648 to 1712, another English scholar, contributed to the discipline by estimating the population of England and Wales. It is worth noting that this is the only estimate of the population size of England and Wales between the time of the Norman conquest and the first census of England and Wales, held in 1801. The works of Grant, Petty and Halley inspired further research in Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden and other European countries. In 1761–62, Johann Peter Sussmilch, a Lutheran, a massive book on population, consisting of nearly 1,200 pages and clergymen, who lived during the reign of Frederick the Great, wrote observations and concluded that generally there is an excess of applicability. Sussmilch based his findings on a large number of French data. He tried to construct mortality tables of universal and appendix of 68 tables, by combining the Swedish, German, and women over men in the adult ages. He is considered to be the first value of the findings increases along with the number of cases on person to emphasize the law of large numbers, implying that the findings are based on observing the frequencies and fertility, such as age at marriage, disruption of marriage by death, more prone to remarry. He also studied the factors influencing prolonged nursing of infants, effects of various diseases, etc. He also observed that deaths were most frequent in the first few weeks of life and that the number of deaths declined to a low level around the age of 15. With a great deal of effort, he tried to estimate the population of the world in the third edition of his treatise, The Divine Order, published in 1765. This was the first such attempt ever made. He also noted, like Gregory King, that population grew in geometric progression. The observations of Sussmilch were, however, interpreted mainly in a theological manner. He saw the divine hand in the regular movements of the populations. If we read the early thinkers in the field of population studies, hailing from different social strata, were engaged in varied avocations and had different ideologies. Yet, these amateurs had one thing in common: their desire and enthusiasm to discover The hitherto unknown relationships, especially in quantitative terms, in the vital processes of life and death. They all shared respect for empirical observations. Most of the research on population during the 18th and the 19th centuries was carried out in the field of mortality and rarely in the field of population dynamics. Such a one-sided development was not unexpected, as the public was mainly concerned with conquering epidemics and diseases. Two social reform programs concerning mortality, life insurance and public health also made great demands on mortality analysis. Insurance companies needed precise data on mortality and hence efforts were acceptance by government of the responsibility of protecting the concentrated on mortality research. Another development was the acceptance by government of the responsibility of protecting the health of citizens by undertaking public health programs. Evaluation of such efforts in the field of public health called for data on deaths and related issues. 2.3.2 Malthus's idea on population growth and development. Population thinkers in the 18th century observed the relationship between the potentiality of population growth and available resources, and arrived at the conclusion that the potentialities of human population growth might surpass the resources required for its support. Benjamin Franklin published his observations in 1755. The Chinese writer, Hung Liang-chi, noted that an increase in the means of subsistence was not in direct proportion to that of the population in the 18th century. These observations, however, did not attract much attention. In 1798, the publication of the essay entitled, An Essay on the Principles of Population as it Affects the Future Improvement of Society, with remarks on the speculations of Mr. Godwin, M. Condorcet and other writers by Thomas R. Malthus, 1766–1834, a young clergyman, attracted a great deal of attention and gave rise to much controversy. The main theme of this essay was that while man could increase his subsistence only in arithmetical progression, his numbers tended to increase in geometrical progression. Population growth was, therefore, to be regarded as the principal cause of poverty. The theme of the theory of Malthus will be critically examined in the chapter on population theories. At this point, however, it is enough to point out that the principle of population is an important landmark in the history of population studies. Bhende and Kanitkar, 2010. Another writers in IGNOU Gyankosh have elaborated that Malthus's famous treatise, An Essay on the Principles of Population, 1798, he stated that if human population was allowed to increase in an uncontrolled way, then the number of people would increase at a faster rate than the food supply. A point would come when human population would reach the limit beyond which food sources will not be able to support it. This would check the population growth caused by natural phenomena, like famine or disease. According to Malthus, human society is never at a perfect stage. When there are constraints in food supply due to increase in population, man works hard to provide enough for his family. This might lead to an increase in agricultural production to provide for all, but at the same time man will be complacent when all his needs are fulfilled. This would push the cycle of overpopulation and food shortage all over again. Being a clerk, Malthus validated his theory on moral grounds that suffering was a way of making human beings realize the virtues of hard work and moral behavior. Such kind of suffering due to overpopulation and limited food supply was inevitable. Malthus made two main assumptions: one, food is an essential component for human existence, and two, humans have the basic urge to multiply. Malthus' theory was based on the notion that the power of population to multiply is much greater than the power of the earth to provide food for them. In his own words, passion between the sexes is an inevitable phenomenon, hence, when unchecked, population would grow at such a high rate that it would outstrip food supply. According to him, disease, food shortage and death due to starvation were nature's way to control population. He proposed that human beings adopt measures like infanticide, abortion, delay in marriage and celibacy to check population growth. According to Malthus, the entire scenario of population growth is a complex one. Excess population meant greater supply of working labor, force ready to work at the available wage rate, and in this way they could support their families. This will lead to an increase in the overall demand for food outstripping its supply. Thus, prices will increase and inflation will set in. This inflationary pressure will affect the already distressed poor section of the society. The poor will work more to improve their situation and will also consider reducing the family size so that they have less mouth to feed. However, this will only last till The population equals the food supply and the inflation ceases, after which, overall standard of living will rise and so will the population explosion reaching the same point. Hence, he called it a vicious cycle. Malthus has proposed two main solutions to the problem of population explosion: positive check and negative check, or preventive check. Positive check results in increase in death rate. He described this as God's way of restoring the natural balance. It includes famines, hunger, epidemics, war and other natural miseries which cause large-scale deaths. Although it helps in controlling the population growth, it also causes widespread misery and pain. Hence, it is not regarded as an ideal solution to population problem. If Malthus is alive, he definitely call COVID-19 as positive check of population method. Whereas, preventive or negative check method refers to human effort in reducing the birth rate. It is more practically and logically applicable. Abortion, prostitution, postponement of marriage, birth control, and celibacy are few measures that were advised to be strictly followed in order to help solve the problem. Moral restraint is regarded as a universally applicable solution keeping up with the ideologies of virtue, economic gain and social improvement. According to this principle, one should refrain from marriage till the time he is capable of supporting a family with food, clothing and shelter. Until then he should follow strict celibacy. In the words of Geoffrey Gilbert, he, Malthus, went so far as to claim that moral restraint on a wide scale was the best means, indeed, the only means of easing the poverty of the lower classes. Malthus' theory had great influence on both Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace, who are the co-founders of the modern evolutionary theory. In his own words, Darwin acknowledged that he was already aware of the struggle for existence among different species of plants and animals. However, it was only after he read Malthus' work that he realized that animals in their struggle to survive retained the favorable features that would help them adjust to the environment, and lost those that were of no use to them. Thus, the theory of natural selection was born. By the end of the 19th century, when living standards improved and birth rates dropped in the Western countries, concerns of overpopulation became irrelevant. However, in underdeveloped countries which have agrarian economies, Malthus' theory often finds credibility. As we know that Malthus's ideas was on the basis of present scenario and he never thought about the technological innovation in food production and population control measures. That is why, some critics like Karl Marx argued that Malthus failed to recognize the potential of human population to increase food supply. He failed to comprehend man's ability to use science and technology to increase food supply to meet the needs of an increasing population. Thinkers from the field of social sciences have criticized Malthus for his belief that the human society could never be made perfect. Malthus opposed all political, social, and economic reforms which did not address at controlling birth rate. The methods proposed by him for checking population growth were mostly impractical. Poor laws were popular in England as it provided relief to the people who qualified as poor under the laws. Malthus was also against this and believed that the poor should remain in the state of financial distress as such charity only provided short-term benefits. From his writings, some have interpreted Malthus as a stiff and pessimistic individual. However, to some he was a pragmatic thinker, who brought in fresh ideas to the issue of population growth. But, we cannot say that Malthus was pessimistic, as he was not technical person. SLM of ACPSD by Diksha Dev. 2.3.3 Population Studies Ideas of Margaret Sanger and Annie Besant. Feminists have always been divided on the importance of birth control to women's liberation. Early feminists such as Annie Besant, 1847-1933, in England, Emma Goldman, 1869-1940, and Margaret Sanger, 1883-1966, in the United States, were pioneers in the birth control movement. However, most US suffragists at the start of the 20th century dissociated themselves from birth control due to the belief that its advocacy was too controversial and might hurt their principal goal of gaining women the right to vote. In later years, feminist activists in rich nations supported access to contraceptives to allow women and couples to limit fertility, with the view that this would improve women's lives and status. Margaret Sanger migrated to Britain, and it was while she was in London she met Mary Stopes. She later recalled, "She then explained to me that, owing to her previous unfortunate marriage, she had no experience in matters of neither contraception nor any occasion to inform her of their use. Could I tell her exactly what methods were used? I replied that it would give me the greatest pleasure to bring to her home such devices as I had in my possession. Accordingly, we met again the following week for dinner in her home, and inspected and discussed the French pessary which she stated she then saw. For the first time, I gave her my own pamphlets, all of which contained contraceptive information. After hearing Sanger's story, Mary Stopes decided to start a birth control campaign in Britain. She knew it would be dangerous as several people in Britain, including Richard Carlile, Charles Bradlaugh and Annie Besant, had been sent to prison for advocating birth control. At the March 1925 International Birth Control Gathering in New York City, Dr. S. Adolphus Knopf, a member of Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League, ABCL, warned of the menace posed by the black and yellow peril. Margaret Sanger spoke of sterilizing those she designated as unfit, a plan she said would be the salvation of American civilization. She also spoke of those who were irresponsible and reckless, among whom she included those whose religious scruples prevent their exercising control over their numbers. From the beginning, Sanger's advocacy of sex education reflected her interest in population control and birth prevention among the unfit. The eugenic theme figured prominently in the Birth Control Review, which Sanger founded in 1917. She published such articles as Some Moral Aspects of Eugenics, June 1920, The Eugenic Conscience, February 1921, The Purpose of Eugenics, December 1924, Birth Control and Positive Eugenics, July 1925, Birth Control, The True Eugenics, August 1928, and many others. Sanger's obsession with eugenics can be traced back to her own family. One of 11 children, she wrote in the autobiographical book, My Fight for Birth Control, 1931, that I associated poverty, toil, unemployment, drunkenness, cruelty, quarreling, fighting, deaths and jails with large families. Just as important was the impression in her childhood of an inferior family status, exacerbated by the iconoclastic, free-thinking views of her father, whose anti-Catholic attitudes did not make for his popularity in a predominantly Irish community. In the 6th International Neo-Malthusian and Birth Control Conference held in New York in 1925, an Indian representative, Taraknath Das, countered the yellow peril with evidence for the white peril, and while endorsing the dissemination of birth control, emphasized that it has to be only a part of a program that aimed at poverty, poor health and ignorance, that were the root cause of India's population problem. He looked at birth control within a broader health and social development perspective to afford greater freedom to women and greater opportunity for real education. A demographer, Louis Dublin, warned against disregard of the permanent interests of the state by promoting birth control. He cautioned on the issue of contraceptive safety and reliability. The issue of control of fertility remained unresolved. How to be controlled, by whom, and for what purpose? 2.3.4 Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi had assessed and felt the pulse of the masses as no other leader or elitist had done. It is a pity that many neo-Malthusian scholars and standalone family planning activists accuse Gandhiji of his negative attitude to population issue. From their records of Margaret Sanger's encounter with him, it is very clear that Gandhi had a clear vision that Indians should have smaller, but healthier families. He had agreed that uncontrolled reproduction was a social problem. He was a strong advocate for gender justice and women's empowerment, for enabling women to take decisions on childbearing and to negotiate with their husbands to observe abstinence. The birth control program initiated in Bombay and Madras did not spread very rapidly because of Mahatma Gandhi's strong moral opposition to those of artificial methods of birth control. Gandhi, the most influential leader of Congress Party and the Indian freedom movement, conceded that India's population growth had to be contained by reducing the number of children each couple had. But he denounced artificial methods of birth control. He argued that sexual abstinence was the only ethical means of birth control. He wrote periodically in his magazines, Young India and Navjivan, New Life, the society that has already become enervated through a variety of causes will become still further enervated by the adoption of artificial methods. Those men, therefore, who are light-heartedly advocating artificial methods cannot do better than study the subject afresh, state their injurious activity, and popularize brahmacharya, celibacy, both for married and unmarried. This is the only noble and straight method of birth control, Gandhi, 1925, cited in Prabhu. 1959, 5. In spite of opposition put forward by Gandhi for the use of birth control methods, the women's movement in India and the various voluntary organizations continued to propagandize and support the use of artificial methods of family planning. The All India Women's Conference, constituted to improve the status of women in society, at their annual meeting in Trivandrum, Kerala, focused on birth control and invited Martin and Sanger. A number of opposing views were expressed, but after a considerable debate, the conference adopted a resolution approving birth control for health and welfare reasons. Martin and Sanger took this opportunity to meet Gandhi and discuss with him the use of artificial methods for family planning. Despite their efforts to convert him to their side, Gandhi stood firm and rejected the use of artificial methods of family planning. 2.4 Movement on Population Studies. Population studies started with mainly two biological events: birth and death rates, and socio-economic and political process: migration or movement of people from one geographic location to another. During the first 2 decades of the 20th century, a steady stream of Indian intellectuals and civil servants visited England for higher education or for training for posts in the Indian civil service. During their stay in England, they were exposed to Malthusian theories and to the establishment of neo-Malthusian leagues in England and elsewhere in Europe. As a result, they became aware of positive checks likely to operate on a population increasing beyond its means of subsistence. In the Western world, India was routinely cited as an example of a population likely to be subjected to such positive checks: wars, famines and epidemics because of the extreme poverty prevailing in the country and the prolific breeding. The Indians who visited England became keenly committed to the ideas of birth control as means of regulating population growth and formed the Neo-Malthusian League in Madras in July 1929. Some prominent public personalities joined the League in Madras. They published a propaganda journal of high merit, the Madras Birth Control Bulletin, Himes, 1963, p. 123. They had periodic discussion on population problem and measures that could be taken to control fertility, including the propagation of various artificial methods of family planning. Population control has been a central concern of population scientists and activists throughout the 20th century. In its negative and oversimplistic sense, it has remained a popular topic of discussion among the elites such as academics, doctors, businessmen, political leaders and bureaucrats. Even in the pre-independent India, from P.K. Wattal, B.T. Ranadive and Radhakamal Mukherjee in 1930s, some demographers subscribed to similar views. Even today, to the series of politicians taking steps to check the increase in population to the bureaucrats, Megan and Leonard Rogers have shaped the attitude of authoritarianism of the higher and middle class in India on the population issue. Over last 70 years, Radhakamal Mukherjee convened the first Indian population conference in Lucknow in 1936. He also headed the subcommittee on population of the National Planning Committee of the Indian National Congress in the 1930s. Father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, and the visionary leader and first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, opposed the inhuman, negative, anti-poor and anti-women tendencies and narrow approaches to population control. It was evident when India introduced the official family planning program as a part of the 5-year development plans from 1951. The post-World War II international movement for population control and family planning had its ideological foundations. Demographers, birth control proponents, and other population activists shifted their attention from the poor and minorities and started paying attention towards the poor and underdeveloped countries. In the 1950s and 60s, US government was influenced by population activists to lead on the international platform. The fear of the population bomb and population explosion was too much similar to that of a nuclear war. Doomsdayers, like Paul Ehrlich, cemented international fears of population explosion in India and China, and the threat to security of US. A neo-Malthusian twist was given to the issue by arguing that backwardness, poverty, unemployment and all other hardships in poor countries were only due to overpopulation, and hence, birth control must be the priority. The neo-Malthusian view of economic development argued that overpopulation is a cause of poverty, rather than a result of poverty. This argument was based on the assumption that poor and underdeveloped countries and particularly lower-class communities are responsible for their poverty. Their fertility, therefore, must be controlled to ensure greater economic prosperity for the families of the poor, for their nations, and for the world as a whole, since the large poor populations in the Third World are considered a drain on the world's resources. The Marxists considered the neo-Malthusian view as reactionary. Other anti-neo-Malthusians and liberalists like E. Duprel, the Belgian sociologist, and Julian Simon became the exponents of a safer and more rational view of population. Many economists dismissed the Club of Rome report. Simon, 1981, remarked, people with a lot of education tend to lack respect for the capacity of people who are poor and have had less education to cope, and may therefore worry that they won't be able to handle their problems in their parts of the world. One of the direct outcomes and fallouts of the international and US policy and strategy in the 1950s and 60s in India was the system of family planning targets initiated in 1966. After the slow phase-by-phase introduction of a clinical, camp, approach and then extension, educational, plus information, education and communication, IEC approach, an aggressive method-specific targeting and new invasive method for women, like IUD, were taken up, the National Family Planning Program was incorporated within the MCH system, where MCH workers were given targets to motivate a particular number of men and women to accept different kinds of contraceptives month by month. A system of rewards and penalties and competitions was built in for state governments, hospitals, districts and MCH workers. The evolution of population stabilization efforts in India by government goes back to the onset of 5-year development plans in 1951-52. A national program was launched which emphasized family planning to the extent necessary for reducing birth rates to stabilize the population at a level consistent with the requirement of national economy. A clinic-based approach with equal emphasis on natural method, like rhythm as on some contraceptives, was taken cautiously, along with awareness building and research on new contraceptives and their acceptability. A family planning research and program committee was constituted, which in its first meeting at Bombay in July 1953 took quite a comprehensive and broader view of the family planning. To quote their report, the committee emphasized that the family planning program should not be conceived of in the narrow sense of birth control or merely of spacing of the birth of children. The purpose of family planning was to promote, as far as possible, the growth of the family as a unit of society, in a manner designed to facilitate the fulfillment of those conditions which were necessary for the welfare of the unit from the social, economic and cultural points of view. The functions of a family planning center would include education, marriage counseling, the spacing of children, and advice on such other measures, including on infertility, as necessary to promote welfare of the families. Interest in fertility, research in the field of fertility was sporadic during most of the 19th century. There were several reasons for this. In the first place, the social motivation for the study of fertility was not strong. Birth rates were not as high as in Asian countries and therefore did not cause any concern. Because of agricultural development, the production of food supplies increased at a much higher rate than population. Fertility differentials were not very conspicuous. There were no fluctuations in the birth rate, nor were there any visible trends in its decline. It was in France that fertility first started declining towards the end of the 18th century, a decline which continued even in the 19th century. The chief statistician general of France commented in 1847 that he considered the moderate fertility of French families as the indicator of intellectual progress, order and foresight. Concern regarding the declining French fertility arose in France only after her defeat by Prussia in 1870. Gradually, throughout Europe, interest was generated in the problem of fertility decline and fertility differentials. 2.5 Summary. Population studies is a multidisciplinary approach and many thinkers have explained population dynamics and its impact on development. Population always cause and consequences of development explained by various demographers in India and also of the world. We have read in this unit and find out many ideas derived from literatures. Over the time, population study evolution has started with birth and death rate and it has taken many forms of birth control. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.